The tree. Warning. Starting with this video, I'll be sharing a series of stories meant purely for your entertainment. I don't intend to change your ideas or beliefs. Some of these stories are based on real events, others are suggested to make you think about things you might not have considered or that could exist in a different way. I want to make it clear that I don't expect you to take everything I'll show as absolute truth. I suggest you watch these videos with an open mind, as entertainment, with the chance that something might spark your curiosity about the unknown and inspire you to explore more on your own. Welcome, and thanks for joining me for another video. I hope you enjoy it. When you're passionate about a topic, especially the paranormal or supernatural, mysteries, and other unexplained events, it's easy to lose perspective on what could be real and what isn't. It's easier to believe it's not true. Our brain naturally labels it as fantasy or fiction to keep our bubble of safety and comfort. These topics are hard for most people to accept, and that's understandable. We're not quick to lose our mental stability by trying to understand things that don't fit what we consider normal in our lives. Our minds will naturally resist anything outside of what we've learned and been taught throughout our lives. This is known as cognitive dissonance, which happens when your mind feels uncomfortable because something new conflicts with what you've always believed. It's that resistance you feel when receiving information that contradicts what you already know. You might be surprised to find out how much we actually ignore about what's happening around us. I imagine you've questioned that at some point. Life, history, science, beliefs, and thoughts are all shaped by the limited information humanity has had access to. They are guided and governed by knowledge and laws established from information and interpretations that some humans, through limited research, have shared with the world. These have been taken as the only truth without any questioning. Well, at least they aren't questioned by most people who live without awakening to the realities that exist beyond our understanding. Ultimately, my only goal is to present these stories for your entertainment and let you draw your own conclusions. I want you to analyze things from a different perspective and eventually consider the fact that not everything that exists is what it seems or limited to what we know. We must accept that most things that actually exist are unknown to us. Let's start. This story takes place in 1992. Some names have been changed for the privacy of those involved. It centers around a group of friends, most of whom had known each other since childhood, as they all came from the same community, Ely, Minnesota. They often gathered at one of their homes, in a coffee, or at a bar to hang out and share stories. This time, they decided to organize a camping trip again in the Chippewa National Forest, a remote area near the Canadian border. Although the area was a bit far from their town, it offered the isolation they were looking for to have fun and enjoy nature, in a camping spot they already knew well. They started their adventure early to reach the campsite at a good time. They traveled in a 1980 double-cab pickup truck driven by Alexis, the owner, who was a member of the group and knew the area well because he was a fan of outdoor activities. At one point during the trip, they left the road to venture into the forest. Later, they had to leave the truck on one of the forest paths that still allowed vehicles like theirs to pass without any problems. After that, they continued walking along long trails, carrying their gear in backpacks, until they reached an area they had visited before, which was little known due to its difficult access. Near a beautiful lake with crystal clear water known as White Iron. Everything was ready. They arrived at the spot around 2 p.m., feeling very excited. Amid laughter and jokes, they settled in, unpacked their things, and set up the tent. It was so large that all 7 campers could fit together, along with their gear and a game table inside. It also allowed them to stand up inside. Everything was going according to plan, as they intended to stay for 2 to 3 days if all went well, so they were equipped with everything they needed to make the most of it. This story is told by Frank, one of the men in the group. He mentioned that the first day was very calm, it was a bit cloudy but very pleasant, and the sounds of the forest were quite relaxing. Despite the chilly wind, he noted that at that moment he didn't realize there were no animal sounds, especially from the common loon, a native bird of the area known for its somewhat unsettling call that can make you nervous instantly, while also filling you with a sense of melancholy. That first day, around 4 p.m., Frank decided to take a walk around the area to gather some firewood, so his friends Margaret and Sylvia eagerly joined him on the stroll, bringing along a bag of chips and a ton of funny stories to share. Meanwhile, the rest of the friends divided some tasks at the campsite to have everything ready for a nice evening. When they returned with the firewood, everything was set to start the campfire, which would be the silent accomplice of all the fun conversations they would have, along with some spooky stories that are a must in an atmosphere like this, especially recalling moments from their past together, some funny and others sad. Everything was going according to plan, the campfire was ready and provided the warmth they needed to be comfortable and prepare their food. They only lamented that they hadn't brought enough drinks and snacks for 4 days, wishing they could stay as long as they wanted and have a good time. Throughout the evening, they touched on sad topics about one friend who would no longer be at these gatherings. He had passed away the previous year due to health issues. It was painful for them, but they tried to lift each other's spirits and toasted to him and all the good and fun moments they had shared. They were so entertained that they didn't think about anything else, especially the mysterious atmosphere surrounding them from the capricious shadows of the trees and bushes, which formed figures that could keep even the bravest awake at night. Suddenly, as if something had pulled them out of that atmosphere of laughter, everything changed, and they all fell silent at once. They listened closely, and all they could hear was the sound of the fire crackling, not even the insects were chirping. Then, they suddenly heard a whisper, as if two voices were talking about things that couldn't be understood. It was so distant that their minds didn't trigger alarms right away to warn them it could be something bad, they simply stayed silent, trying to listen for anything that could give them an answer. No one spoke for minutes. They were so focused on listening to that distant whisper that, suddenly, a loud nearby whistle startled them, as it sounded very clear and strong. It broke the moment of uncertainty and quickened their hearts. Margaret and Sylvia hugged each other as a way to protect one another. They were so frightened that they continued to say nothing. Frank was so nervous that he couldn't move. That whistle was heard just a few meters away from them. What had started as a pleasant trip to relax, an escape to disconnect from their daily routine, quickly turned into a nightmare that made them feel in danger. So, if you've ever thought about camping in a secluded place, think twice after hearing this story. Get ready, because what you're about to hear might make you seriously consider that this world has inexplicable things that we haven't wanted to accept in order to maintain what we know as normal. This is independent of your religion or beliefs. There are phenomena that exist and don't need you to believe in them to cross your path at some point. You'll share what happened, but it's unlikely anyone will believe you, as they prefer to stay protected within their bubble of security, which is denial. Frank tells us in his own words.
I'll tell you exactly how it happened to me, because honestly, I still haven't gotten over it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and can still feel that unsettling presence stalking in my mind. That changed my life forever.
They mentioned that the place was quite far from everything, lost among hills and trees, where the phone signal was very weak. Perfect for getting away, or so they thought. That night, Around midnight, while they enjoyed the campfire, they noticed the air became thick, making it hard for them to breathe. The murmur had already put them on alert, but the whistle was what made them react. Everyone stood up, and some grabbed any heavy object they could find to defend themselves against something they didn't even know what it was. And as if that weren't enough, in the middle of all the creepy and confusing moments, they heard Ruth, one of the friends, say in a shaky voice,
"That tree moved, and there's something inside."
Everyone turned to look at her at once, then instinctively shifted their gaze to where Ruth was staring. It was an old tree, large and twisted in its branches, standing several meters away from their camp. There were more trees around, but this one stood out for some reason that made them uneasy. Maybe it was the fear hanging in the air after the whistle and the murmurs, but Frank mentions that they froze, staring at the tree. Its bark looked battered, with so many wrinkles it resembled skin. At the bottom, almost level with the ground, there was a large, very dark hole. It was so dark that even with the light from their phones and a flashlight, they couldn't see any better. It was as if the light refused to touch that tree. When they finally managed to ask Ruth what was going on, she told them that she had seen something peeking out of the hole. It looked like a face, and she could see glowing eyes blinking. Everyone exchanged glances, searching for any explanation for what they were witnessing. They huddled around a campfire for over half an hour, unsure of what to do. They tried to record a video for a closer look, but it was useless. The lens captured only darkness. Frank explains that they were terrified. They didn't even want to talk for fear of making noise. Finally, mustering their courage, they armed themselves with makeshift weapons, fire torches and the flashlights from their phones. They cautiously approached the tree. Up close, it was even more imposing and frightening. Frank comments,
It didn't look like a natural tree, it felt as if it stole the air from you when you got close.
When they got pretty close, they shined their lights up into the branches to make sure there wasn't anything that could jump out at them. Then they pointed the light toward the hole, but they couldn't make out anything, just shadows that looked like dark roots inside the tree. This calmed them down a bit, and they told themselves that the darkness had played a trick on them, and maybe the cold air had made them hear the whistle and murmurs as it passed through the leaves. Feeling more relaxed, they started to laugh and calm down. Just as they were about to head back to the campfire, they heard a faint whistle coming from inside the tree that was barely distinguishable. They confirmed it when they fell silent and listened closely. That's when they realized it wasn't the wind. Inside the tree, they could hear the whistling. Instantly, they shined their lights back into the hole and noticed that the figures that looked like dark roots began to move slowly, as if something was stirring within, like a heartbeat. They also noticed that the tree was changing shape very subtly, to the point that it was almost unnoticeable. Frank said he noticed that some branches were in different positions. They could barely make out the movement of that thing, but they froze in fear. Suddenly, in the center of the hole, bright eyes opened that almost formed a terrifying face. It was barely distinguishable from the darkness. The horrifying part was that it was staring directly at them. At that moment, they quickly stepped back to prepare to run, but what stopped them, and startled them the most, was when they heard the murmur again. It was barely understandable. It was a terrifying voice that said,
Kanuki.
At least that's what they understood, Frank explains. They couldn't move from the fear they felt. Only Sylvia had stayed behind her friends because she didn't want to peek out due to the fear she was feeling. It was her who pushed them from behind and yelled for them to return to the campfire. She tells us it was like they were coming out of a trance, a feeling like holding your breath underwater and finally catching your breath. In that instant, they reacted, and everyone ran back to the light of the campfire without taking their eyes off the tree, then immediately locked themselves inside the tent and turned on the lights inside. Frank recounts that they couldn't control the trembling of their bodies, they couldn't speak. They huddled in the center of the tent, and most of them stayed awake the rest of the night to keep watch and listen for any noise. Frank explains that it was torture not knowing what was outside because sometimes they could hear the murmurs and a whistle in the distance, but at times, the whistle sounded close, along with other noises, as if something was dragging through the bushes around them while they caught a very strong smell of stagnant water or decomposing mud. It was the longest night of their lives, it felt eternal. Early in the morning, feeling calmer under the questionable safety of daylight, curiosity took hold of the group, so they decided to check out the tree again. At least most of them wanted to go. They weren't sure if it was the thrill of adventure or the need to debunk what had happened the night before, but they headed toward that old tree to investigate. Upon reaching it, they realized it was enormous, its branches stretching toward the sky as if trying to escape the earth. The bark was rough and full of scars, as if it had endured centuries of storms and disasters. It was clear that it had been there long before time began to be counted. Frank explains that the strangest thing was the hole in the trunk. It looked like a dark cavity that seemed to swallow the light around it. Contrary to what they expected, they didn't see anything strange anymore, just a hole full of insects, not even roots like they initially thought to justify the figures or shadows they saw at night. Alexis, who seemed the least scared that night, later told Frank,
"I got closer, and I could swear it looked like something was watching us from inside the hole last night. I don't know if it was just the shadows playing tricks on my mind or if there was really something there. But I saw a face, or something like a face embedded in the trunk. It was dark, like it didn't have a mouth. A cold sensation ran down my spine, and at that moment, I felt like we weren't alone. It was as if that tree was alive. I mean, like a being that could move like an animal. It was really strange. Like it wanted to tell us something."
Frank adds,
We didn't want to find out more. We quickly packed all our things to flee from that place. We made sure the campfire, which was right in front of the entrance to the tent, was completely out before we left. But what no one mentioned, and I noticed that several of my friends saw it and didn't say anything, were the marks on the ground behind the tent, like something had dragged heavy branches because there were deep, wet footprints in the dirt, along with leaves.
The group of friends left the place as soon as they could. They recount that while they walked away, they couldn't stop looking back at the tree. Perhaps their fear made them feel watched. They walked in silence, staying alert for any noise, but only the natural sounds of the forest surrounded them. Even then, the call of the common loon echoed, sounding even more terrifying. When they finally reached the truck, they felt relieved. They loaded everything up and left immediately. Frank says that the entire way back, no one spoke, some fell asleep, exhausted. Upon arriving in their community, Alexis dropped each one off at their homes. There were no comments, just cold goodbyes, without any intention of discussing the experience. It was understandable, they still didn't have an answer in their minds. They were still struggling with the reality of what they had lived through and the urge to dismiss it as some kind of hallucination or the infamous collective hysteria, a common response when people can't explain something abnormal. Frank comments,
After that, I was left with a nagging curiosity about what I had experienced. So out of sheer curiosity, I did some research on that tree. I made a few calls and visited locals who had lived in the area longer. I checked online forums and the internet in general, but those were just overly fanciful stories. To my surprise, I discovered that many people avoided that area, possibly influenced by legends. They claimed it was actually cursed and that one shouldn't desecrate that place. Some said that in the past, there were rituals to pagan entities. Others said that something evil had been living inside that tree for many years, something that was always looking to escape by deceiving people. I heard stories about people who got too close and never returned. I don't know if this is true. I don't know what we saw that night, but I swear I'm never going back there. If you ever find a tree like that, with that kind of hole, don't get close. Some things are better left undiscovered. There are mysteries that are preferable to leave buried. Curiosity can be a dangerous path, and I assure you that sometimes, what you find goes beyond what you expected.
Frank says that the close-knit group drifted apart. Margaret moved away the following year, and they rarely heard from her. They never went camping or on outings again, and they seldom gathered. Perhaps they didn't want to relive that unforgettable night. Well, this brings the story to a close. I hope you enjoyed it and that it inspires you to reflect on the mysteries that lie beyond what we think we know. I appreciate your company on this journey full of enigmas, and I hope to see you in future videos. Thank you for watching until the end, and if you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you wish, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Your friend Mr. Rollister, who always wishes the best for you, sends you a big hug. Until next time, take care. The end.